All right, everybody, I get asked quite often, because it's apparently my role and my job in life. Yami, what makes a great motorcycle? Why don't you like my motorcycle? Why is this motorcycle great? What do you think about this? Blah, blah, blah. It seems like that is the thing I need to come together with the most. And I've actually developed a bit of a system to try to understand what is a great motorcycle and what makes a great motorcycle. And I'm actually in front of our Ducati Panigale V4S. That's not a Panigale, it's a Street Fighter V4S over here. This is our giveaway motorcycle. Head over to yaminoob.co, become a member for as little as $5 a month, get access to all of our exclusive behind the scenes content, our Discord server, and you'll get entries to win this bike and all the other giveaway bikes we got going on. That is the best way to support what we're doing and just to join at a deeper level. The Discord is awesome. You should definitely be on there. I talk about stuff like this on the Discord, and I do exclusive streams with the Discord boys. You've probably seen those videos where I'm just like holding my phone and chatting with people. They actually get access to those and you can talk to me, which is pretty cool. But today I wanted to kind of look over this idea of what makes a great motorcycle and kind of talk through my thought process behind that. So the first point I wanted to make is that there are plenty of objectively bad or weird motorcycles that people love. And just because your bike isn't objectively great doesn't mean you can't love it. I have plenty of bikes that aren't really all that great, or plenty of people would assume they're not that great, and I love them. My Desert Sled, for example. A lot of people think that bike is, not really purpose-built for going off-road. It's not really a great street bike. It's not particularly fast, but I love riding the thing. I don't think there's many better options for an all-around kind of street bike option like the Desert Sled. I think it's a great motorcycle and I have a ton of fun riding it. My Turbo Hayabusa, that's really not a great motorcycle, but it just puts a smile on my face and you just can't help but love it. But I think it's really important that, you can have these bikes that are objectively weird or bad that you love, but you gotta understand a bike's use case. That's my first point I wanna make. You gotta understand, what did the engineers and designers and manufacturer have in mind when they made a motorcycle, right? Did they want you to go rip up a track day with it? Did they want you to go long distances with it? Is it an adventure bike? Is it a sport touring bike? There's all these categories that bikes fit into, and manufacturers actually ascribe themselves to those categories and then build bikes around them. There are some bikes that kind of blur the lines a little bit, something like the RS660 from Aprilia. That's kind of a genre-bending motorcycle, which I'm gonna get into why I think those bikes are usually the best ones. But you gotta start from there, right? You can't expect an R6 to be able to run over a bunch of really bumpy rocks, and you can't expect CRF 450L to be an amazing highway machine and crush miles. You gotta temper your expectations with what the bike is designed to do. But all that being said, you then establish the fundamentals. They all have basically the same control inputs, and you can kind of start to evaluate a motorcycle and think about what's making it great based on those control inputs, which is what I try to do when I ride a new motorcycle that is new to me that I haven't ridden yet. So the first thing I look at is that every motorcycle should do some of those basic things and do them well. The first one is throttle. That is the first thing that I think about when I get on any motorcycle, is what is this throttle like? Do I have good control over this throttle? Am I predictable with this throttle? Do I have good on-off with this throttle? What is it like when I roll on this throttle? How long is the throttle tube? Because really on a motorcycle, the throttle over here is the most important thing, guys. It's the most important thing between you and the bike. It's the most immediate connection you have. It affects so much of the motorcycle, second only to brakes in my opinion, but the throttle really is so important. And it's not to be confused with power or power delivery or the amount of power. I'm gonna talk about that later as well, but I really think the throttle characteristic is the most important thing. The next thing I want to talk about is the braking performance on a motorcycle. Can you modulate this brake? Do you have good feel to the lever? Is it mushy? Is it firm? Do you have good stopping power? Is it appropriate stopping power for the machine, right? If I'm on a sport bike, I want really good brakes. I want to be able to pull that lever nice and progressively, get a lot of power out of the front end, and be able to coast off of it and trail off of it really nicely. Most new motorcycles are able to do this pretty effectively. Kind of a dirty secret in motorcycling is that unless you're talking about like a super entry-level beginner bike, most brakes are totally fine and adequate and have no issues whatsoever. But I do like to feel that interplay between throttle and brakes, and I want to be able to feel really good modulation off the brake lever and be able to actually really be able to use that on the everyday. The clutch feel as well is super important for me. Do I have a good bite point? Do I have a good feeling over the engagement on the clutch? Is it predictable? Is it crunchy? Is it weird? Those are things that I would look more on a used motorcycle, but brand new bikes usually have perfectly good clutch feel and you can actually get good actuation out of it. One thing I like to look for, this is just my own opinionation on it, but you know, is it a heavy clutch? Is it a light clutch? I prefer a more lighter clutch pull. It's just easier to operate, easier to use. In talking about the clutch, the shifter to me, do I have good positive engagement on the lever? Is neutral easy to find? Do I like the position of the shifter from the peg? There's all these things related to the shifter that I like to look for when I'm evaluating a motorcycle. And then from that point on, once I establish those fundamental control inputs, do I feel like they're good enough? I look at handling. Handling is a huge, broad topic when it comes to motorcycling. And it depends on the motorcycle you're riding, right? Like nobody would jump on a DRZ 400 and expect it to have 50 degrees of lean going into a corner and to be able to really rail around corners and power out and stuff. So the handling for me really depends again on the use case of the motorcycle. There are motorcycles that are designed to do certain things that they're just not gonna do well otherwise, right? As I mentioned, the example I gave before was if you jump on an R6 and you expect to be able to kind of lop over a bunch of logs and rocks, you're gonna have a bad time. Conversely, if you jump on a CRF 450L and you expect to keep up at your local track day, you're also gonna have a bad time. There are just these things that these motorcycles are designed to do, and some of them do it better and some of them do it worse. And it all depends on what you're trying to do with it. But when it comes to handling the suspension, it's basically, is it predictable? That's what I'm looking for. When I flick it over on the side of the tire, am I getting a nice neutral feeling from this motorcycle? Does it hold a line well? Is it establishing itself where it needs to be, especially for street bikes like this? Is it predictable is what I'm looking for. And then I also look for, is it adjustable? You know, it's not to say that adjustable suspension is always better than non-adjustable suspension. I've ridden plenty of motorcycles with fully adjustable suspension that did not handle particularly well, even when I try to dial them out and do all that, but having the flexibility to adjust is a pretty good thing. I also think that, you know, you gotta think about, am I getting too much dive from the brakes? Can I dial that out? Is my sag set correctly? Or are all these things set correctly on the motorcycle? These are all things you have to think about, but handling is a really tricky and complicated subject. But I'm basically just, when I evaluate a motorcycle from a handling perspective, I think about, is it rebounding really aggressively? Is it compressing the forks too much? Is it predictable? Is it not surprising me? These are things that I want. I want it to be able to handle undulations in the road and bumps in the road with sophistication, with you know, dignity, let's say. There's a lot of motorcycles that just get out of sorts when the going gets a little more bumpy, or you flick them over on the side of the tire. I've ridden a lot of bikes that I did not particularly appreciate the way they handled. But again, you gotta temper your expectations with what the bike is designed to do. The last thing I think about in terms of fundamentals are the ergonomics of the machine. Do they make sense, right? Are they comfortable? Am I on a sport touring bike and is the seat, you know, hard as a rock? That's not gonna work because it needs to go long distances. Or am I on a super sport motorcycle that's meant to be ridden around a racetrack and I just feel like it's kind of awkward? Ergonomics are a tricky subject as well because motorcycles have to fit a wide variety of people, and yet they are very much not designed for a wide variety of people. I feel very lucky in that I am about 5'11", 165 pounds, and basically every single motorcycle I've ridden, with the rare exceptions here or there, fit me pretty well. But when I evaluate a motorcycle, I like to think about, if someone is 5'4" or 6'4", would this work for them? Would they feel challenged by this? Which is why I talk about seat height and inseam and the width of these motorcycles a lot on my reviews. I like to think about, if this motorcycle is gonna fit somebody who is smaller or larger, would they feel cramped? Would they feel like their arms are stretched out too far? And does it make sense for the type of bike that it is? Something like this Street Fighter V4S, it's a very neutral seating position, a little bit more aggressive with the bars up here, but overall a pretty standard neutral position, and I find it to be very comfortable. This seat also very, very nice and plush on this thing. Those are all related to ergonomics as well. I also like to think about how heavy the motorcycle is with ergonomics. People don't think about that very much, but if you have a very heavy motorcycle and it's very wide, you need a much larger inseam to be able to flat foot and maneuver this motorcycle, right? So ergonomics plays a huge role in your riding experience with the machine. If you don't feel comfortable and you don't fit on the thing, you're probably not gonna ride it for a very long time. Now, this comes into, after I establish those fundamentals, those are all things I look for in every motorcycle. The next part is the kind of fun and opinionated stuff. And for me, power and power delivery really falls under that. For me, I like to think it is basically totally subjective unless it's not giving you enough power for that particular category. But to be honest, every modern motorcycle makes plenty of power, even something like a Ninja 400. You know, you look at this Ducati Street Fighter V4S, it is making 208 horsepower versus like an MT-10 that makes 160, 170 horsepower. Guess what, guys? Both of those are plenty good, and the gearing and the throttle and the rev range are all going to indicate actually how fast it feels. An Aprilia Tuono V4 1100 feels much faster than the Ducati Street Fighter V4S because of the way it makes this linear, belting kind of torque down low. And that's why I say the power delivery is very subjective, very opinionated. You can prefer the power delivery of one motorcycle over another, and both of them will be able to perform in the same way. You'll be able to get similar 0 to 60 times, 0 lap times, because motorcycles, unlike cars, are very much rider dependent. If you're a good rider, you'll be able to extract a much faster lap time with any motorcycle than a rider who is not as skilled on the same motorcycle. So that's really important. So you may enjoy screaming inline fours, you may enjoy torquey twins, that's the fun of motorcycling. We can all like different things, but what I'm looking for when I evaluate a motorcycle is the power fun, you know? Am I getting something unique, something interesting, something characterful out of the motorcycle? Because the engine on the bike makes a big, big difference. This Street Fighter could handle and look the same way as it does, but if it had a Kawasaki Versys 650 engine in it, I would hate it. It wouldn't have the same panache. It wouldn't have the same feeling of effervescence and the crazy high rev ceiling. That's super important to me. The next thing is the styling and the looks. This is super subjective, completely subjective, one might even say. The evaluation of a motorcycle from a styling perspective is completely your own opinion. I know that this motorcycle, for example, I think it looks awesome and aggressive and cool and fun, but there's people here at Team Yami Noob that don't feel the same way. They feel this motorcycle looks kind of ugly and weird. And so it all depends on where you're coming from motorcycling. If you're used to more classically styled motorcycles like a Sportster or a Royal Enfield, this may be a little polarizing to you. You might find that this look is a little weird. Conversely, if you're used to fully faired sport bikes, you may not love the look of something like the Speed Triple 1200RR. You want something that's a little more classically styled, let's say. And then for me, there's also the intangibles. It's the way it makes you feel, how peppy or fun it is, how light it is, how willing it is to do wheelies, and what you're feeling on the bike, the history, the heritage of it. Does it have look back factor? Those are all things that I like to think about when I'm evaluating a motorcycle, but I understand and recognize that they're totally subjective. Just because I think that this motorcycle has tremendous look back factor, the cool Ducati pedigree, it's a Street Fighter, it's a V4, it's their newest engine. I think that's super cool, but for somebody else, that may mean nothing. As another example of my Turbo Hayabusa, I look back at that thing and I'm like, hell yeah, like that's a classic statement of motorcycling top speed, and it's just this really awesome thing. And it's just, you know, that might not be for everybody, right? And so that's, again, a totally subjective thing. I also feel that motorcycles that are more flexible than other motorcycles are better, and that's just my own opinion, but I feel like something like the RS660 with its luggage rack back here and the fact that you can ride it around and you can take it on a track day and have so much fun with it, that to me is a great motorcycle because you can do a lot of stuff with it. My Husky 501, my FE 501 that I have, love the motorcycle. You can bomb around town with it, you can hit up trails with it, you can do a lot of stuff with it. But there also is something to be said about laser-focused niche motorcycles, like I have my Daytona 675R, my race-prepped bike. It only goes around racetracks fast. That is the only thing that bike does and wants to do. And there's something to be said about a motorcycle that is super laser-focused on one thing. So it depends, you know, like maybe you want something that's super laser focused, or maybe you want this more jack of all trades, fun, flexible type of motorcycle. But I really think that your stable should reflect a couple offerings like that. I think that's where the Goldilocks zone exists. You have one kind of do it all around bike, you have one laser focused bike, and you have one maybe just heritage classic bike that kind of speaks to your soul type of thing. A 3-bike garage is really ideal in my opinion. But at the end of the day, you gotta love the bike that you ride. You shouldn't be riding a bike you don't love. It's important to ride many different bikes and figure out what you're into. And it's also important to have that balanced stable, but you gotta ride what you like. But having a system to identify these motorcycles' flaws and characteristics is really important. It's just a system that I've developed over my years of riding motorcycles. I've ridden probably over 250 different motorcycles at this point. I've owned 50 or 60 different bikes. I've gotten the chance to ride many different motorcycles on track, off-road, on street, and over time you start understanding what is good and what is bad and what you prefer on these motorcycles. And then also those fundamentals, they all interact in a certain way, right? The throttle feeling interacts with the handling, interacts with the engine's characteristics, and you start realizing, oh, okay, this bike does this really well because of this, because it works well with the throttle and the handling, and the rev ceiling works really well, and the gears are a little bit longer because of X, Y, and Z. And you start coming up with this kind of additive effect of why the motorcycle is good or bad. But guys, that's just my personal opinion on it that I've developed over the years. I highly recommend that you could read up on other journalists' perspectives on it. I'm not my journalist myself. I'm just a guy who makes YouTube videos, but I've gotten the chance that's very similar to what journalists do, where they take a motorcycle and evaluate it and try to get the best out of it. And that's all I have to say about it. What do you guys think? Do you have a system for riding different motorcycles and trying to evaluate it? What do you think makes a motorcycle great? Is it as simple as, do you think it looks cool and do you like riding it? That can be it too. You don't have to get super in the weeds with it. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's video and learned something from it. If you did, join over at yaminoob.co. It's the best way to support what we do here. You can get entered to win all the giveaway bikes we have. You get access to exclusive behind the scenes content, and you get access to the Discord server as well. It's a great time. You won't want to miss it. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.